Our topic is desires. And just to clear up some confusion around this term desires, so that we don't look at it in a fashion that it's not realistic, because often there's this unrealistic attitude towards desires. So let's start from a beginning, a simple Q&A kind of session. Let's ask the question, what gives birth to or rise to irrationality and inappropriate behavior?
A lack of emotional maturity.
The state of mind. The same mind, sometimes it thinks very good things. The same mind sometimes thinks different things, and the same mind certain times thinks things which are very bad.
Right.
So it is the state of the mind or the mood of the person which decides what kind of desires he has.
So that would then naturally then pose the question, then what influences the state of mind, which then causes irrationality?
Yes.
Right.
And that could be the weather, it could be the environment around you, it could be the sound level, sound decibels, it could be your own mental state, mental mood.
Yes, yes. And environment has a huge impact. Psychological studies basically say that when you are in an environment, you find yourself doing things that you otherwise would have never done if you were on your own. So it depends on who's around you and what kind of pressures, those external pressures, are causing you to have strange thoughts that even you yourself are surprised, this is not who I am. So it's very true. The environment is crucial in terms of making it either easy for you or sometimes very challenging to just to do ordinary things.
I was thinking the root cause would be fear. For example, a fear of lack would then promote some sort of desire. So that's what I'm sort of sensing here.
Got it. So in other words, there is a fear of missing out. And because I've linked so much well-being or for myself that I need to get it at whatever cost. So the person naturally will go into a survival mode. And to survive, one needs to preserve it, needs to maintain it in their life. And they will go through certain lengths to get it. Now, let me just narrow this question down. Look how it's going to change the moment I say, what makes you irrational?
Yeah, Andre, I think we touched upon it last couple of classes. It would be your desires, and specifically you mentioned binding desires, where you want that thing to happen for sure, to be happy,
Yeah.
to feel fulfilled.
But I'm going to get to that soon.
Yeah, for me, it's about overwhelming responsibilities. Sometimes when I'm really overwhelmed with tasks to be completed in 3 buckets, right? Home, career, job. So in that time, it's sometimes then I have to literally pull back myself, reorient and prioritize. If I'm not conscious, then I tend to sometimes just explode. So I really have to watch out.
So it sounds like it becomes a lot to bear.
Yeah. So I have to be particularly conscious about how much I'm willing to take over on my plate, be able to distribute equally. I'm still learning, trying to get better. Yeah.
I think we're all learning indeed. And also someone said extreme stimuli. This is also true. A lot of data is coming and it tends to shut down that viveka, what needs to be done in this moment, because it's too busy trying to put things in the right place.
For me, it's the expectation, maybe expectation from me or someone. And when the expectation is kind of not fulfilled, then I get irrational and I go out of my behavior.
Yeah. So high expectations that are not keeping with what can actually be accomplished, or sometimes demanding too much and the situation is just not able to bring you that.
Reacting to things that you're not conscious of. You know, we have parts of us like the saboteur, you know, that we might say something, we're sabotaging ourselves in that situation, or like being challenged. You know, it's really reacting and not just being present, pausing, processing what was said or happened before acting, not reacting.
Yeah. I would even say, go one step further, is that one doesn't have the necessary experience to have fallen down enough, been pressured enough to be able to get up and recognize what it means to not succumb to these pressures, and know to what it means to remain grounded, remain centered, and say, no, this is not where I'm going to head, because I already went that way last time and it didn't turn out very well. So I would also say it's experience of having fallen many times and having gotten up. So this is where Krishna wants to tell Arjuna, if you go to the mountains, then you're going to deny yourself those opportunities to learn how to undo these distortions that are causing you to be irrational.
For me, I think it's kind of instant gratification, temptation, like I'm trying to watch what I'm eating. I've been told I'm pre-diabetic, so I need to cut back on sweets and carbs and things like that. But, when you're trying to do it, but you're just having a bad day, or something comes in front of you that's so tempting, like it's really hard to just, what you're doing is wrong, but it's just, sometimes just that instant gratification you get is just takes over.
I totally get that. There was a experiment done called the willpower, comes from the Willpower Instinct book. And there were kids that were told to look at sweets for 5 minutes. And then after those 5 minutes were over, then they were told to complete a test that would take about 10 minutes. And then the second group, they didn't have to look at the sweets at all. So they didn't have to resist that temptation. And both of them, they did that test. And the group that had to look at the sweets for 5 minutes, they gave up much earlier in the test because their willpower muscle got exhausted. So the book wants to show you that even that willpower, that ability to say no, even that is a muscle. Even that gets tired, which is why after a hard day of work, you come back and you just sort of indulge sometimes because it's been spent at work. So anything requires rejuvenation, even your willpower. Amazing. That's why, as I think it was Pankaj who said, environment is so important. If you expose yourself too much to the environment, it constantly demands you to say no, 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 no. Eventually, you know what's going to happen? You're going to say yes, because every time you say no, you weaken that muscle for the day.
I think it's also to do with having a predisposed wrong position or perspective, and then going about defending it out of ignorance and ego.
In other words, one doesn't have the right education, is not including all the variables in that moment, and they just don't know all of the possibilities. And so it kind of creates this narrow vision of one possibility alone. And so one goes along with it. Yeah. And also because it's much easier to go with whatever is available in front of you, it's much easier to say yes to that than to kind of sift through and say, well, maybe there are other better options. That's very hard to do. So we call this the path of least resistance.
Yeah, I think the role of actual physical discomfort is there as well. It kind of, makes you irritable or tired or something. So I've just been having shingles, and it creates this very unpleasant sensation on the skin. And you kind of notice that it's kind of tiring to deal with that, even though you think you're dealing with it, but it's tiring, which makes you irritable. Can do. And also one day I had this very clear experience where I had the expectation that it should be feeling better, right, on this particular day. And I brought that expectation to the physical sensation, and it wasn't feeling better. And so it made it feel worse because I had the expectation it should be feeling better, and then it wasn't. And so it almost made it feel worse because of the expectation. So it was the thought that I brought to the experience which distorted it and made it worse than it, otherwise was.
I would add to what Gautam was saying too, it just and to that ignorance and not knowing that we are part of the whole. And so the ignorance and unawareness that that person or this situation is a part of me leads to irrationality. Yeah. In fact, that's a very good point because you see, do you hurt your own body? Like, are you going to freely just hurt your body? No.
But then we, it kind of engage in these hurtful acts and criticize. That's big. Now imagine your body was as big as and capturing everyone else. Would you now criticize your body if it included the very person that you were criticizing just a moment ago when your body was different from them? No. So in this way, we put our identity here and then identity there. So we forget the big picture. I forget that there is only one here. And by that virtue, I'm able to give myself permission that this is different from me. So therefore, I kind of exclude it from the wholeness that I already am. And so you're right. So we forget the big picture. We forget that there is only one presence, one intelligence here that's manifesting as Andre, as Thomas, as Mike, as Gautam, and so on. And so we also, according to last week, we said the term fire gets covered by smoke, and that fire represents your viveka, your thinking capacity. And smoke represents when that thinking capacity is left to untrained. It's not fed food. It's not fed some classes or material. So that fire, that viveka, tends to revert back to its old patterns, and it covers up the ability to discern what is to be done. And there's also, as we said, a lack of education. So I don't know what to do. There is environmental influences, which is a huge one. There is lack of support. And it's, you know that a support group is always very helpful. But we can also put it into one category. Let's now narrow down all of these responses into one, according to the verse. So we can stick with the verses, according to one root cause. And the root cause is binding desires, okay? So everything we said, these pressures that make us act out in an irrational way, that though you're very aware it's not healthy, there's still this compulsion that I have to do it. It's just one time, tomorrow I'm not going to do it. It's just today that I will. So it kind of makes this voice go on in the mind. And Krishna said it is because of these binding desires. So then the question is now, what gives rise to binding desires?
I think the primary root cause is vasana and repeated indulgence in that desire. So therefore it keeps becoming binding, more and more binding, because we keep indulging and the vicious cycle keeps getting deeper.
That is a reinforcement of we're now talking about how it reinforces itself. But we need to talk about what's the root cause of binding desire. We have to go even deeper than that.
Yeah, so I think so binding desire, but a binding desire is there because we think that specific desire, if we fulfill from that object, we'll be happy.
Yeah.
And we think that object gives us happiness, which is not true, and which is ignorance, as Gautam said.
Okay. So now if what compels me to pursue the binding desire is I want to complete myself, right? Because that's the only reason why we do things. Then what does that imply about the I who is pursuing? They think they're not complete. Yeah? So then what's the root cause of binding desires? Who is the one who has binding desires? The answer is going to be I am. So then if I want these things to be completed so much, what does that say about what my identity is? It means that my identity is still partial. So what gives binding desires? My identity is still placed in the small, limited individual. And that small, limited seeker constantly attempts to fill oneself up by contacting what we call the Anandamaya Kosha, tries to feel happy through different means. So in other words, the seeker is always limited by virtue. That's why you're seeking. And the way to seek implies that the seeker wants to find something. Now, why do I want to find something? Because it is going to complete me. Why will I go through extreme lengths to complete myself? Because it's painful to feel partial. So let's ask this. What is a binding desire? How does a binding desire start? So now we've talked about the root cause of binding desire, which is partial identity. That means my eye is placed in that which is always limited, always trying to seek to complete itself. Then how does a binding desire start? Because binding desires are the root cause of irrationality. And irrationality produces a quality of life that is not inspiring. According to Krishna, he says, it starts very innocent. It starts like this. You see an object in the distance and you say, that's nice. Follow me along. See if you relate. That's nice. Next time. That's really nice. No big deal. Innocent. Oh, yeah, I think it's nice too. Next time. Wow. More attention. Next time. Kind of want that. I think I want that. Next time. I really want that. Next time. I must have it. I'm gonna get it. You are now in the stage of binding desire. So what did you do in this process? It's called becoming one's own salesman. A binding desire is persuading oneself through a constant narrative that I need to have it because it's going to complete me, it's going to fill me up, it's going to create a better life. After all, I'm old and I need it, you know, everyone can have their cake and eat it too. Why not me? In other words, you convince yourself through an ongoing story why I should have it. We sometimes say, you know, I'm not a good persuader. I can't convince people. And yet you're the greatest salesman. The testimony of that is binding desires. Therefore, how does a binding desire start? Something that says, I must have this because it's so now deeply connected to my well-being. It's very simple. Starts innocent, and every time I tell myself that story, the desire becomes firmer and firmer, more entrenched in why I should, to the point where now it is, I must have it because it is for my survival. Now, that binding desire thus becomes a burden because it needs to be fulfilled. It doesn't just stop there. Nobody says, I've got a binding desire for this. You know, I want to follow up and get it. Now, what happens when there's an emergency? When there's pain? How do you conquer? How do you cure that pain? It's not an easy, it's not something simple. Maybe some blood is, you know, leaking. How do you cure that? What do you do? First aid, right? You don't think about what's the right thing to do. Just where's the first aid and go and solve the problem. Therefore, when there is a first aid involved, I go and do what has to be done. I go and get that object. The question of what's the right thing to do, what's the rational thing to do is not an issue in that moment. All that is an issue is getting that first aid to cure the pain of binding desires because it's so well entrenched in my identity that I require it to survive, to breathe. Having convinced oneself for so long. Thereby, why does irrationality come? Because of this process that of pain that I have to remove. Yes, Ellie.
Well, I think in the emergency, you go into fight or flight mode, which is why then you act on it urgently.
Yeah.
It's almost like it bypassed the desire mode or whatever the brain does, you know, because it just happens and then your, I don't know, sympathetic nervous system takes over, right?
In the same case here, you can apply it here. Your system for survival, for well-being, for completion takes over. And naturally, I just don't think about what's the right thing to do. I just want to get the object. So it's not like the person's being intentionally evil. Let me break the rules and let me be irrational. It's just how it is. It's just a continuation of reaching out for that first aid kit.
Is there an age where that's more like stronger or not as strong? Because it seems to me like I'm older and it's not as strong. Those desires aren't like the same as they were maybe as a teenager, but so different as a child. I wonder if there's something.
I thought about that. I think there is. I think there is biological wisdom too. There are stages of life where biology has to take away certain hormones and bring other other kind of corresponding thoughts. That's just biological wisdom. So it's true. Those in their 20s will certainly, you know, email me very different kind of questions than those in their 60s. And usually those in 20s will be about sex, will be about self-pleasure, will be about, you know, things like that. And I understand that. That's just because that's what the stage is. It's very powerful in that. And so sometimes, you know, even just age itself can help a lot.
You know, I like to read some of the Stoic type philosophers, you know, Epictetus or however you pronounce that name, and Marcus Aurelius, different philosophers. And when I read them, it's just, you know, it's all about emotion, you know, whether it's, you know, sexual kind of things, desires, or whether it's avarice, stealing, or just temptations like eating the wrong thing when you know it's not something you should eat. And it's a matter of habit. You know, that's what I see with the Stoic philosophers. It's like you see it and you analyze it. Is that what I really want? And you say no, and you don't do it, and you just keep not doing it and just keep not doing it. And then it's a habit, but it seems like it's mostly emotional. I mean, whether it's anger or anything else, it's emotions getting in the way of what you want.
Yeah, or what
you know, that doesn't
that
doesn't always apply for food or something that you really need, but for an awful lot of things, it's emotional kind of things.
Now, speaking of emotion, Krishna then said, if this binding desire does not get fulfilled, what follows after? He said anger. So why do you think this happens? Why is it not happiness? Like, why is it not like, oh, cool, I didn't get it. You know, it's just minus this need that I need to have it again. It gave me the opportunity to say, I don't really need it. Why don't we do that instead? Why do we feel angry? Anger just means an emotion that is unpleasant or heavy or uncomfortable or discouraging or anything that's in a kind of a darker sphere. Gautam?
Andre, it's because of the frustration. Because from the like to the want to the desire to becoming binding desire, we have convinced ourselves how we need it. Now it's a matter of need and not just a like. So because I have been deprived of the need, felt need, that's why I'm angry.
Right. So it's almost like a part of me is being stripped away or denied because it's so entrenched in one's identity.
Yeah, Andre, so I think it's because our nature is happiness and we're trying to get back to our true nature.
Now, verse 39 then continues and he says, these binding desires are even enemies to the wise. And he doesn't mean to say that binding desire is an enemy to the self, to consciousness. It is an enemy to the Jnani's mind, because the Jnani understands that all that is here is Ishvara. But because of these binding desires, there is still this pull that makes one feel like, though I have understood that I'm Brahman, I still don't feel like it. In fact, this is a common question asked. You know, I've understood this reality and I'm firm with it, but I still don't feel free. That's the word, feel free. I feel bound and I feel like I'm still pulled by my binding desires. Very common question. And that's why Krishna says, even for the wise, because of these residues still percolating through the mind, they make you feel like as though you are distant from the truth. So in that sense, there's no place for complacency, for for feeling comfortable in your know-how. The journey continues even for the wise Jivan Mukta. This is how it is. Therefore, it's a very reassuring verse, as I said last week, because it removes this fantasy mode that a wise person is incredibly peaceful. This is what we have. You see, the mind's still there. There's a layer of the mind which is still going through its old stories. And those stories, they're mithya. They continue. That's an order of reality, that they have a certain reality to them. Awareness doesn't get touched by any of that. But you cannot deny that who wants to have a mind that just keeps on yapping for the next 30 years? Though you know you're free, the mind's yapping for the next 30 years, right? You see, so this is very humble, actually, to understand that I can know the reality. I'm the self. That is pure, clear. But there is a mind, and you don't say, oh, it's just the mind, this is called denial, immaturity. The mind is still going through its process, and I will do whatever it has to be done to work on this mind, because it is, you're extending compassion out for the mind.
Is that usually considered to be the reason why meditation in Advaita is, is an integral part of things? Because even though you might have a clear sort of understanding, all of these other processes just continue out of habit and so on, and meditation helps you to realize, I think is the word, to fully realize the truth.
Two reasons why meditation is used. Before moksha, it is used to help the mind be pure and keep it sattvic, calm and relatively composed. And it helps tremendously. After moksha, you either continue meditation because you've been doing meditation, or you continue meditation because you recognize the benefits of meditation. And the benefits is it really does create a beautiful, discerning, calm, tranquil mind. It really does. So why would you stop if it's useful in both ways? But in terms of using meditation to establish yourself deeper into the truth, this is not what Vedanta says.
So you wouldn't agree with the position that some teachers say that knowing is not enough?
There is a context for that, and the context is that there are certain individuals or minds which will say, I know, I understand this. It's clear that there's only one intelligence that's pervading everything, and I am the truth of that intelligence, which is awareness. They will say that. However, due to a disconnect, they call it between the heart and the brain, right? The knowledge and feeling it and just abiding it effortlessly. There's a still disconnect there. And the way to bring that is through what we call nididhyasanam. Now, nididhyasanam is a term that is not only including meditation, it also includes contemplation. So it depends on what your term for meditation is. In Vedanta, that meditation is not silencing the mind. It is using the teaching from the class and bringing them in a way that makes sense to you, taking little parts that are really impactful, that really hit you, to your heart, taking those parts and just taking a moment to contemplate them and see how, am I included in that, whatever I'm contemplating in? So bringing those connections and creating those connections in your brain so that it is a holistic vision. Therefore, the answer is yes, they are right, but there's a certain context to that.
Sure. So it's partly a terminology thing again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No worries.
So this is an excellent point. You see, Vedanta is very clear. If one only engages in knowledge, there are people who do this for 20 years and their knowledge is still just immature, right? Knowledge is clear, but the emotional complexion is still complex. It's immature. And I say, why is that? Do you meditate? No. Do you do what kind of practices do you do? I don't do any practices. Well, no wonder. What do? You just learn and ascertain the knowledge, think. What other practices do you have, right? So we need to look at it as a holistic journey.
Is it perceptual as well as emotional, would you say?
It is perceptual because how you perceive the world, based on your understanding, of course, will determine what kind of expressions you deliver towards the world.
Right.
Yeah. So, and also perception is the meaning that we give to the world. If I give a meaning that this person was rude to me or whatever because I'm not good enough, that's a meaning. That's not true. That's a meaning I've gave it. So that meaning will then determine how in turn I feel about myself and how I respond to them. And how I respond to them will then reinforce the kind of person that I am and how truly I'm establishing the truth. And if I respond in an unbecoming way, then that's going to say, well, Andre, you don't really know the truth because there's only one reality. So how you respond will determine the follow-up responses and thoughts that you have after your response.
Yeah, no, this is like you already said that there's some misconception that a Jnani should have this desires, binding desires. But Shankaracharya lays down the rightful Jnani by giving out Sadhan Chatushtay and Shat Sampatti, wherein he is saying Sham, Dam, Titiksha, Sadhana, Uprati. These things are mandatory for him to have to become a recipient of Gyan. So in Sham, Dam, Uprati, Sadhana, he's supposed to have transcended all these binding desires. Then how come?
Good question, good question. So the Sadhana Chatushtaya is given to a qualified seeker, a seeker who is trying to understand the knowledge. Now, see, this is why, Gautam, we have Nididhyasanam. So they are part of your listening and your contemplation and your removal of doubts. They're all part of that. But though there is just enough discernment, just enough spaciousness in the mind, just enough clarity, as Michael was saying, to be able to naturally connect with what is being said. That much of purity of the mind is required. Because look at this, let me prove it to you.
Okay.
When will you ever have a perfect mind?
Never.
You see, even just the word perfection is always going to be relative to who I'm asking this question to. So now, if I'm looking for this Mr. or Mrs. Perfect Mind, which is always going to be different to somebody else's, then when does the journey stop of suddenly understanding the knowledge? So there is no perfect point that I reach my mind, and then only then the knowledge takes place. At some point, the knowledge will take place. But at whatever point it is, will your mind ever be perfect?
No.
No.
So there's a past percentage given, and then there's a scope to go on top.
Yes.
There's a past percentage given. Okay, you have to reach this, and then only you become patrata, and after that you should keep improving after also becoming Gyani, and keep doing Nididhyasana, and keep improving your emotional quotient.
Yeah.
That way.
That's an intelligent Jnani. Yeah, who doesn't stop the journey. They don't, rest. And as I said, one cannot afford to be complacent and to put their instrument away. It is a God-given instrument. It can do a lot of beautiful things. It can contribute. It can serve. And so naturally you want to give to God, because God's been giving you for how long? For a long time, right? Why do you not want to give back? That's a healthy disposition of a character. You want to give back. In fact, that is the healthiest form of a human expression. We call that compassion. Compassion is the hand. Empathy is the feeling. Compassion is extending my hand out. And who is the most compassionate one? Bhagavan. He is giving to everyone all the time. And what are you and I doing since the day we're born? Taking more. So there's a certain time when this shift happens, and that shift is an indicator, a testimony to the maturity of the person. And that maturity is contribution. Not contribution to get something back, but the cup is so full that it's almost painful not to give. You just have to give back. And so this is the journey of the wise person.
Do you think one can overcome desire if they can always say to themselves, I'm going to do what's good, no matter how difficult, no matter how much I suffer, I'm going to do what's good?
I think it can help as a form of self-reassurance that you have the ability to conquer. It has worked. I mean, I've told myself many times, I'm sure you have too, stop. Like, the mind sometimes is like a pet. Like a pet, just stop. No. Right? You just be very firm, and you'll be surprised how quickly the mind listens. I mean, how often do we even treat the mind like a pet sometimes? We don't. We just let the mind run wherever it wants to do. Oh, mind, it's okay. Ishvara, please help me. You got to help yourself. So sometimes just no. Okay, enough is enough. And then you say that, of course, it's not one time. You say that again and again and again. And it can. I'm not saying it will completely, but it can shake up the degree of that intensity. So, and also see, it's very important to know that we're not talking about what to do. What to do, because there's 1,000 different what to do's. We're just saying what's the right way to live. And then how you fill those gaps in, that is up to you. Because we're all adults now. We don't need to be told, do this, breathe, meditate. You do whatever you want to do, but there's one thing that is universal. You and I both know what is a healthy life lived. And by that virtue, we fill in the blanks.
I was just thinking in terms of contemplation of the teachings, if I'm experiencing, there's just been a lot of frustration and anger, but I don't actually voice it out, but I can feel it in my body, and it's showing as well. So a contemplation would be, what desires are fueling my frustration and anger? So it could be, if it's my health, or the health of my pet, I would just then sit with that, and I would ask, well, who am I?
One little adjustment that I will make to that statement is, who you are is a different order of reality, right? So desires at the level of the mind. So dealing with desires, one has to use the order of reality that the desires are in. And that order of reality is called Vyavaharika. I have to work, use psychology, use different means, different questions, different contemplations to look at the root cause of this desire. Maybe I've got excessive expectations. Maybe when I was a child, then I had these big, expectations because I saw my mom or dad always delivering so much. And now I expect my partner to deliver equally. So maybe that's an unconscious thing playing out. So I work at the level that the desires are at. But when it comes, so now why are you doing all of that? So that the mind can be relatively free to click the knowledge of who you are. It can click naturally. But in terms of this whole approach, which is called Neo-Vedanta, where a desire comes and you just say, who's experiencing this? Oh, I am. Oh, therefore I'm limitless. And this desire is useless. It's not sustainable. Because what you're really doing, are you just kind of finding a place somewhere in the toolbox of the mind to put it in, lock it for a while, but it's going to creep out, guaranteed. Therefore, in Vedanta, we say specifically, psychology has a place and it needs to be looked at because it's a powerful force that makes you do and live out the quality of life that you have. So that has a place to be addressed. Why are you addressing that? So that you can enjoy the reality without being bothered 1,000,000 times per day or throughout the life of these unconscious, unresolved patterns that should have been undone a long time ago. Yeah. So what I'm saying is nothing gets ignored. Because whatever's popping up, that is requiring my attention. See, it's popping up for you. It's not popping up for me. For me, something else is popping up. So what do? If this is popping up, then it's popping up in whose reality? My reality, your reality. That means it is part of your reality. Now, do you want it in your reality? The answer is no. Therefore, what do I have to do as a responsible individual? I have to resolve it to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
Is that work? Oh, yeah. For how long? Last breath. That's how it is. Down to earth. No escapism. It's not possible. Because where is it going to escape? To whom? So if I want to push things off, to whom is it going to go? If I want to push my gremlins in the mind away, to whom is it going to go to? It can go to no one else but to the very same mind from which it arose from, which is my mind, your mind. Therefore, if it goes back into my mind, it will come out sooner or later. And nobody wants to live in pain. Therefore, work is required.
So how do you resolve it, Andre?
As I said, Gautam, there is no final solution to everything. And I'm not here to tell, how. You figure out how. I'm just here to show you what kind of a life do you want to live. Then you have to use your own discretion to figure out your own ways, how to turn things around in a way that just loses that hold, that power upon you. That is your prerogative, your journey.
Andre, can you give us an example where you were able to control your pet, your mind?
So where you control your mind, you treat it as a pet? Yeah, sure. So I think I said last week that my binding desire a long time ago was creating unnecessary thoughts towards individuals that are not living up to standards. And, I kind of expect them to do the right thing and I want them naturally, right? So, and all these kind of voices kept on coming on and on. And it was bothering me. I knew rationally it's not the right thing to do. So 2 approaches, I said. Number 1, my mind's like a temple. And a temple, if you knock on a door, you have permission to reject whoever is on the temple door or to accept on him. So number one, I said, no. Thought, you cannot enter my temple called the mind again. No. I kept doing that for at least 1,000 times. So maybe 500 or whatever times. It's not easy. And the second is your mind is like a pet. It means that the mind wants to do its own thing because it's been trained for a long time. Just like a dog. A dog has to be told, no, don't sit or don't poop here. You have to go out. But not once. On and on and on again until the dog learns through whatever means, whether through pain, whether through discipline, whether through repetition, whether through respect of the master, whatever is required, the dog has to get the message. The mind has to get the message. After how long? Quite a few attempts. Now that mind is your mind. So that mind requires, requires some repetition.
Why do you think that thought of being considerate and improving other people was a problem for you?
It was a problem because it is not my journey to opinionate or to give an opinion what others should be. That's not my business.
Okay.
Everyone wants their mind to be quiet. You know, I want to accept you as you are. I don't want to be constantly subject to having to think, Gautam should be like this, Christina should be like that. It's just bothersome. So the question is then, who is it bothering? It's bothering me. And do you want to be bothered?
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't. Nobody wants to be bothered. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So you have to find some way to train the mind to just stop because it's been doing that a long time. And the good news is it's possible.
Yep.
That's a fact. It's possible.
Thank you, Andre. It was a great example. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Andre, now this is some question which has been bothering me. So this is a little profound for me.
Okay.
So now you have already touched upon this, that is the new Advaitins, they're trying to shove this under the carpet by saying that, I am the whole and this doesn't belong to me, or, this type of argument, right? So so therefore, are we saying while we are in the transactional reality, we have to find our answers within the transactional reality only, and there otherwise to do a superimposition saying that I am the whole and therefore this does not or should not affect me will be worthless, or this superimposition also becomes a toolkit and can help me within the transactional reality? Or if I may put across, while within the Maya, I can only know the final Advait reality, but I can only intellectually know the final Advait reality, but that intellectual knowing does not help me. Only after I realize it, then only helps me. But during the process, I have to go to the transactional reality tools only to find an answer.
Got it. So number one, it doesn't, you can't really say knowing the reality helps me. Who is it helping? It's not, you're not the Jiva in the first place. So knowing the right reality of who you are, it doesn't help anyone. It's who you are right now. Number two, it can serve as a reminder, but you also have to come to see that I'm not here to, fool myself, because there's a danger of convincing oneself, I am the whole, I am the whole, I am the whole. And then you're just walking around totally self-convinced, I am the whole. And that kills off any further inputs. That's called, no, don't tell me, I figured this out. And one doesn't want to come to that place. So initially it can, anything can be useful, right? One can remind oneself every once in a while, I am the whole. This is not really touching me, but your definition of me is not truly keeping with the reality at that moment. Yeah. So your me is still the body mind. That's the reality for you.
That's right.
Right. But still, even if you say once in a while, right, that in reality, this is not really touching awareness, because awareness, if awareness was hurt, then that hurt would be in every single experience. Are you constantly hurt? Are you constantly, carrying hurt no matter where you go? Are you carrying hurt in your deep sleep? Are you hurt in your deep sleep? No, you're completely free in your deep sleep. That means nothing from the waking or the dream sticks onto you, the awareness. Okay? So once in a while, it can work. However, see, the methodology is about understanding the reality, not about using it as a coping mechanism.
Okay.
So rather than spending time using these words, I'm Brahman, as a coping mechanism, rather spend the time in just sincerely paying attention and getting what is being said, thinking about it.
So what you have said is, in that transactional reality, be very transactional with that emotion, and don't use the coping mechanism to put a smoke over the whole thing and say, I'm a Brahman, it is not touching me, but in fact it is touching you as a jiva. Is it? That's what I see.
It's touching you as a jiva. Otherwise, you create this split between yourself. The person is speaking as a jiva, and yet they're using this reality as a sort of another status dumped onto the jiva. You see, the whole journey is about freeing yourself from the jiva, not using the teachings to add onto the jiva. That's why we say the teaching is paravidya. Paravidya is the knowledge which is not additive, it is subtractive. So we're not adding extra tools, extra statements to cope in this world. That is all at the level of the person, at the level of the mind, at the level of the psychology. When it comes to paravidya, the higher knowledge of who you are, it's not additive. You're not adding anything. You're subtracting notions that make it appear that as if you are this individual. You're subtracting those erroneous notions. You're removing the notion that I am as good as this changing mind, changing thoughts, changing desires, that I'm as good as my desires, that I'm, ridden by my past karma. You're getting rid of those notions because those notions are not true. They're not even true now. So the knowledge helps you to remove those erroneous ideas. Whereas at the level of the mind, what do we use? We use basic down-to-earth psychology to deal with the mind.
But then when we are doing nididhyasana by way of neti, where are we trying to reach? Aren't we going back to the same thing what we are just saying that we should not? Is the aim of doing that only solely to establish the reality that what I am really am during that process, and after that process is over, then still encounter that emotion the way in transactional world you have to do it. But while doing nididhyasana, see to it that this emotion which is coming to this jiva is not coming to me. Is it?
When you get it, from that moment on, there's no more doubts about who you are. If you hear other notions about that are confusing, like 253 says, Shruti vipratipanate yadastasati nishchala samadhavachala buddhi tada yogam avapsyasi. So 253, the Gita says, when your intellect is established in that knowledge, then even when you receive these notions that are confusing and kind of mystical, it doesn't move you because you are deeply established in who you are. But even though you know who you are, Gautam is still saying that with a mind, isn't he?
Yes.
And that mind is still the same mind that has carried all of the impressions since childhood. So naturally, it will have some ideas that are still worthy of being looked into. And those ideas will slowly be reduced through nididhyasana. So nididhyasana is a lifelong process, in short.
Thank you.
It kind of seems that we're working on two levels really at the same time, because in terms of thoughts, like say if thoughts are a problem, like the observation of thoughts, say in meditation and seeing the way that they just arise by themselves and completely disappear instantly. And there's a stream of them which never ends. Now, for me, that really helped to, get thoughts in perspective, right? As being, I'd say, a kind of lesser reality. I know that's a dangerous phrase, but but a sort of, they don't have a necessary significance. They don't necessarily have any significance. So many thoughts come and go, and so, that's on the more general understanding level. But that doesn't mean that if a thought keeps coming up and bothering you, that it doesn't need to be dealt with on its own terms. And as Gautam said, it you know, on the transactional level. So it's almost like you're getting a higher perspective, as it were, but that doesn't mean you can, you know, you don't have to still deal with something which is a problem. Does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, you are the higher perspective, so there's no getting.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So now, secondly, with thoughts, see, there's two ways to deal with thoughts. One, if your thought is resolved, you've worked on it, you've taken time to looking through alternatives and perspectives, right? You've done your due diligence in reference to a thought. Now, does it stop even though you do that? Does the thought stop even after you've done your due diligence?
No, and that's the that's part of what's effective for me in reducing the significance of thoughts, because they just carry on their own volition.
Good. Now, so what I want to say is, though you have put the work into your thoughts and you have done whatever you do, like forgiven and look at the perspectives, pratipaksha bhavana, it's up to you. And the thought continues. Do you still keep on addressing that thought? The answer is no, because you've done your work. There's a certain time when you have to give yourself permission to say, I've done enough work on this thought. This person or whatever it is keeps on appearing in my mind. Enough. I've done my work on you, buddy. But when you switch a fan off, does the fan stop spinning immediately? No, it's got momentum. Thereby, though having worked on the thought, it still keeps arising for maybe one more year or whatever, couple more months. You've done your work. Now, if the thought keeps on coming and it's deeply disturbing, then it's a potential indicator that some reorientations of your thoughts have to be done in reference to the thought. You have to rethink it and do some alternative modes of reframing. So there's always, you know, you have to know that difference. Is it enough? Because if you keep on working on one single thought, I mean, come on, you got 10,000 more thoughts coming up, right? So you have to give yourself some, you know, some break, like done, next, like that.
You'd agree that the insight of the sort of spontaneous and ephemeral nature of all thoughts is helpful.
You know, thoughts are not a problem if you look at them from a different perspective. And so, okay, look at it. Let me prove it to you, because it's just a statement. You know, we often, when we talk about thoughts, we talk about getting rid of them. They're bothersome. Okay, look at this. Do you want to do that to pleasant thoughts? Isn't it? They're just thoughts. Pleasant thoughts are thoughts, unpleasant thoughts are thoughts. And yet we always talk in this manner about unpleasant thoughts. But nobody talks about pleasant thoughts, appreciating Ishvara, you know, seeing things as they are. Thoughts are thoughts. In other words, we're not trying to do anything with thoughts, just see things as they are. Because even seeing things as they are, that itself is a thought, whose truth is Ishvara, whose truth is awareness. So this whole thing about getting rid of thoughts, oh, okay, cool. Then I'm going to tell you, please get rid of positive thoughts too, beautiful thoughts. Are you going to do that? No one would dare do that. You see how we fool ourselves? That's why it's important to look at thoughts. Even thoughts need to be looked at in a proper light. They are coming and going. They are an expression of this intelligence, which is constantly, you know, surrounding everything and making things as they are. Not surrounding, but is everything, making everything as it is. And I just have to recognize that. Recognizing that, then where does my mind go? Does it go on forms, or does it go on the recognition of the one reality? It goes on the recognition of the one reality, which is beautiful. And that's where your refuge is in life. That's where the joy is. So when it says here, binding desires are an enemy of the jnani's clarity, not of the self, because jnani knows the self, there's no rebirth, but of the jnani's clarity, of the jnani's joy to live out this life, one last life, to appreciate what is. In that sense, it's an enemy. Because nobody wants to live in a state of, you know, seeing things just as small, petty things. It is grandiose, it is magnificent, and you have to see that, and that's the journey. That's nididhyasanam. You see, if there's only one reality, how can I see second? What second are you going to see? So one has to start seeing even their thoughts as just an expression of intelligence, recognizing the presence of the order in all things, and naturally your thoughts will turn in that direction. Then there's nothing to fix, only to appreciate. And how did that happen? Changing the focus. Once? No. Over and over and over again. Tell me this, when you go out and you see a tree, what do you see? Where does your vision stop? That's your opportunity. I can see a tree, I can see the leaves, I can even see money on the tree. It's called pratibhasika. Oh, I'm going to grow some apples and sell them. That means you're 2 times removed from reality now. Or you can see a tree. Or you can see deeper than the tree. It is atoms, it is particles, it is knowledge and power, making that tree what it is, knowing exactly what fruits to bear that tree will. And that tree grew from a seed. Where was that tree in potential in that seed? And that seed, whatever knowledge it contained from the previous incarnation of that tree, that knowledge in that seed is there. If the tree before this tree learned to strengthen itself because of the high winds and the floods, then that knowledge will be carried over into the seed, won't it? Right? It will be carried over into the tree because a tree has to adapt to the environment. It's called, survival of the fittest, right? So the tree will learn that. And then the tree bears fruits. So whatever the tree has learned, the fruit will, that knowledge will go inside that little fruit, that little seed. The seed falls, it grows into a new tree, and that new tree now has all of the knowledge that has been learned by the previous generation. You're like that too. You're like a seed. Right now you're a tree. There was a tree before you. That's why you're bearing different fruits called punya and papam. Some of them are bitter fruits, some of them are tasty fruits. See, so the focus changes. The moment I see a little bit deeper, the whole conversation, feeling about what is changes. That's the point. Therefore, thoughts are utilities, useful, nothing to be scared of or to deny or to push. They're just there. Depends on where do you keep training your mind to look. That's what you will find.
Yeah, my hand was up, but I got my answer in your last sentence.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that I think for most of us, I can't speak for all. For me, my mind dominates my body or my intuition, and it gets to the point of sometimes where I can't sleep. And so I was thinking, is there any good use of such mind where you just can't stop being in your mind? Because I'm hearing all the time that we need to quieten the mind and be more intuitive and more relaxing in the body so that you can take decisions or live your life a lot more with the intuition and body, not just with the mind.
Yeah, but see, also the environment that you're in can make a big difference, what your mind is experiencing. So, I mean, I don't know what your mind's going to, but as I said, everyone needs to manage their own minds. If you cannot sleep, then I don't know what to do. Because you know your mind better than anyone else. But the point is, what's the vision? Like, what vision? That's all you got. What's the intention? The intention is to live a life that is, established in the truth. And it's an expression. I'm expressing the truth. I'm adoring creation because there's only one Ishvara here. So if there is anything other than that, then it's an indicator that the mind has a few corrections to do. So your mind is the greatest blessing. It is the one indicator that's telling you, hey, dear, this needs slight corrections because I only want to bring you to reality, which you are. And so instead of looking at these things as always bothering me, why mind, I've got such a terrible mind, rather one could say, okay, so this is happening. This is the truth. It's going on. Okay, what is this showing me? And what slight kind of modifications can I make? So there's always that option given you, and you just have to say yes to it.
So you mean rather use them like an indicator to find the areas you want to work on, rather than just being in the contemplation and in the iterative state of being of mind.
Well, an indicator does get followed up with contemplation. So that's the way
Yeah, it does.
it's turned around.
In a better way, mind is friendly, and if you use those indicators wisely.
Yeah. So, and as I said, if that indicator keeps on coming up, then, sorry to say, but there is, work to do. Sometimes it can go on for a year or even 5 years on average. You might as well just prepare yourself and say, this might go on for 5 years. That way, at least you're not complaining, where is it going to go away? But the good news is everything goes away. Everything changes. And is. So when things do reduce, that's an indicator that whatever you're doing is working. And sometimes it's not even a matter of doing anything onto it. It's like, remember how we said fire and clouds, fire and smoke? You don't have to do anything. Just acknowledge it. A prayer is enough, and it goes away in time. That's level 1. Level 2, we said, is, or level 3, even, the fetus, where I don't see it. It just takes some time, 9 months, 5 years to go away. But the good news is, as long as your intention is sincere, you want it to reduce, it will go away.
What is the difference between spiritual bypassing and having a fallback, or kind of resting in the knowledge, and kind of, does that require faith then at that point?
Yeah, they're very close. Spiritual bypassing is not willing to confront the issue, not willing to look into it. So just using some tool, some fallback, and not following up with the issue that arose. Whereas having a fallback is sometimes you just don't have time to work things out right now. Sometimes you just need a quick reminder, quick kind of boost, to give enthusiasm into your life. However, you are really serious about solving whatever it is that keeps on coming up for you. So one of them doesn't deal with there's no follow-up. The other one uses these, these methods, but does follow up to get to the root cause.
So, Andre, my question is more related to what we were discussing earlier with Gautam, like Nididhyasnam and liberated person, Gyani. So I have this, not confusion, but this question, and might be a very common question, that so a person, a jiva, it's and even the thought, like ego, everything is prakriti, right? Thought, like we read in chapter 2, thoughts, and consciousness or Brahman. There is only one, which is pure consciousness. So so when we say someone gets liberated or becomes wise, Prakriti doesn't become wise; it's insentient, and Brahman is already full. Like it doesn't need to become wise; it's already wise. Then we say that Jiva becomes wise. Then do we mean that out of that whole concept or a bundle of thoughts which that Jiva is in presence of consciousness, you are just removing that one specific I thought and not changing but removing that notion of I am all of the other thoughts which are coming to me, and just removing that appropriation which that I thought do to other thoughts, that okay, you are not that but whole consciousness. Is that the right train of thoughts?
Okay. I can answer this in 2 ways. One, in an intellectual way, which I'm not going to do. Second, in a way to give you direct experience right now. So I want us to close our eyes and for a moment, bring to your mind an elephant as clearly as possible. A gray elephant with maybe white tusks, a gray trunk. Okay. Make sure that elephant is known. It's in front of your mind's eye. Okay? Now for a moment, swipe that elephant away as if granules of sand just get blown away. Now let us imagine the front, or bring an image of the front door of your house. Front door of the house, color of the door, Maybe there is some wooden pieces or a glass window with reflective shine or bricks. Front door of the house. Okay. Good. Now let's swipe that away as it being blown by the wind. Now let's bring an image of your mother, face of her. As clearly as possible, her hair, skin color, her smile. Now let us open our eyes. Was the elephant known to you? Was the elephant known? Yes. Was the door known? Was
Yes.
the mother known? Yes. When the door was known, in that moment, was the elephant known? No. When the mother was known, in that moment, was the door and the elephant known? No. So there was a knower who only knew about exclusive objects, knowing about the elephant, knowing about the door, knowing about the mother. Not only was the knower exclusive, that means exclusive to the elephant, exclusive to the door, exclusive to the mother, but how long did that knower last while imagining the elephant? Like 5 seconds, right? So the knower was time-bound and was changing in respect to what contents are inside that knower. 2 parts. 1, the knower was time-bound, knowing for this, knowing this, knowing this for 5 seconds. 2nd was exclusive to one object alone. But what was there in all objects and throughout the entire 3 kinds of knowers? What was there? That's what I'm talking about. There was whatever you want to call it. You want to call it Bugulugu, that's fine. We'll go with Bugulugu. We call it Brahman. We call it awareness. We call it consciousness. It is through and through the knowers, the known objects, and continues all throughout. It is not bound by time. So that's how I'm going to answer your question.
Thank you, Andre.
Yeah, Andre, please help me reconcile what I'm going to say logically, because I feel a contradiction when we were discussing this, that if a Jnani has binding desires and if he acts out of these binding desires, then he, like a Jiva, will gain Punyam and Papam and he will have a rebirth. Then the whole story collapses.
No. My identity is no longer in my causal body, the Sanchita Karma. And whatever actions the body and the mind does produces punya and papam, but it's going into where? The Sanchita Karma. But that Sanchita Karma is no longer mine. So it's not going to me awareness, it's going to Sanchita Karma that is no longer owned by anyone. Therefore, there is no rebirth, because that which is never born is never born, can never be born. And you are that. So you're that all along. You just don't know it. So when you remove those associations onto you, right, the causal body, the part that makes you be reborn as another wave in the ocean, when you remove that cause, that causal body, your association to it is removed because it's not you.
But then why did he act like a normal Jiva? Because if it is removed, then he should not act like a normal Jiva with a binding desire. But
Because
if he acts like a normal Jiva, he will get a Punyam Papam like a normal Jiva and then have a rebirth to, get that prarabdha out of Punyam Papam.
Yeah, the answer is because you still have your prarabdha karma. It's not finished. That means you still come with certain things to exhaust, certain inclinations, certain desires, certain habits, and those habits will continue for most likely the rest of the person's life. And that's, that let that run its course. But the Jivan Mukta, see, when we say Jivan Mukta, Gautam, we do not mean the body that is being carried, nor the mind. We mean that which is always true, awareness. And awareness is never born. Because what was there before time and space, before the universe came? Right, when everything was, like Ellie said, when everything was in potential, the whole universe, including Gautam, was in potential at some point. And Andre was also in potential. Okay. And there was nothing. There was no stars, nothing, not, any kind of elements, just pure existence. And so that existence is not born. What's born? The universe is born. Forms are born, right? Gautam is born. The person is born. The storyline is born. But the underlying existence is never born. So your identity shifts from that which is born to that which was never born. So then how can you be reborn again? If that which is never born is all pervasive and is everything. You see, you can only be reborn if you think you are not everything. If you are everything, pervading all things, the very substance of all things, then how can you be reborn if you're already everything? That's why there's no rebirth. So until the jiva shifts, removes this identity that that I am as good as this jiva, then there is a rebirth for you, because you keep on coming back as that which you believe yourself to be, which is an individual. But in reality, you are the all-pervasive, eternal, unborn, unchanging, limitless self right now. And that self is known to you as a self-evident I, self-luminous. You don't need to do anything to know that you are. That's always been the case. And in this self arises, due to the power, Prakriti, arises individuals called Gautam. And because this power has what's called Avarana Shakti, it veils the knowledge from the different creations, from the different jivas. So the jiva looks at themselves as no more than just one individual amongst many. And two realities are denied from this jiva due to this Avarana Shakti. One, that there is only intelligence here, manifesting as forms. And two, the truth of that intelligence is consciousness. And those two realities cannot be gained other than through a pramana. Science cannot give you that.
I was just going to same continuation as Gautam. So when you said identity has shifted, that means there is no doership. So wouldn't for a wise person or a Jivan Mukta, there would not be any binding desire, because binding desire would only be binding when there is a doership.
Yeah, so that's true. There's a subtle point there. There is, see, Krishna is going to say that the ultimate remover of desires is knowing who you are. The binding desires, they may be reduced because that what's the point of just pursuing these things? They're not going to give me anything. But mostly that's because of your journey to get there, of your long time to understand that. So in one sense, the desires do weaken because of your work and your sincerity into it. But remember this, binding desires are always at the level of the mind, never at the level of the self. So when we say Jivan Mukta still has binding desires, what are we saying? The self has binding desires? No, their body has binding desires. Am I that body? No. But the binding desires are still there. So when it says they are an enemy of the wise, it can mean different contexts. If you are generally trying to live out your life, for the last couple of years, then definitely you don't want these, these binding, like I have to, this is for my survival, because it's going to make you feel like you're still distant from the truth. And so that can be very confusing to the person because, they understood and yet they still feel like they're a small individual. That is those remnants, which is cleared through Nididhyasanam. Yeah. So what clears those small, I'm a small individual remnants, though you've understood specifically in Vedanta, we call that Nididhyasanam.
I had a point that we are discussing Jivan Mukta. A person who is a Jivan Mukta, he doesn't have binding desires. That's why he has become Jivan Mukta. So why should we say that he will have binding desires and he will do some sins and will pay for his deeds? No, he is already conquered all this and he has become Jivan Mukta. That means he is beyond all this and he has to live through his prarabdha karma to the end of his life.
Yeah, got it. So I know where he's coming from. So see, look at it from a kind of a normal, down-to-earth standpoint. There is a mind. A mind will have certain ideas. Can you find, Pankaj, any person, wise person, who is just like perfect in their conduct? At least if you get to know them a little bit better. You're not going to find one person. We can only imagine. See, we love to imagine. Oh, Ramana Maharishi. Okay, great, because you're in a great environment. You're surrounded by so many disciples. Everyone's looking up to you. So you got to act really nice, right? So we always create these ideas of a perfect person, but that idea belongs to you. So if you look at it down to earth level, whether you want to call it binding desires or psychological pressures or emotional inconsistencies, whatever it is, it will be at the level of the mind because there are hardcore entrenched neurons since childhood. That's not going to rewire itself the moment you realize awareness, right? So we have to look at it on a very normal, down-to-earth level. But I want to reassure, because the person has done so much work on themselves, for sure, binding desires have lost their strength.
That's it.
Okay. Next week, we will close chapter 3 and we will summarize chapter 1, 2, and 3 to give us context of what we've done so far. Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.